Hello and welcome to PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale history, where today it's time for yet another stage. This time we'll be taking a look at the Graveyard, home to Sir Daniel Fortescue. The Graveyard was the second stage released as DLC, giving Dan a stage where he previously never had one. It also gave representation to a small PSN title, mixed in with the medieval representation. It's an interesting stage since the only real hazards are sarcastic remarks aimed at certain characters which aren't nearly as harmful. So let's dive in and take a look at what's what. At the beginning of Medieval, Dan was resurrected from the dead. It stands to reason that the place he emerged not long after this happened to be, well, a graveyard. The graveyard was actually the location of 2 levels, since there is also a level called Return to the Graveyard, where Dan investigated a large crypt and ultimately gained his dash move. The graveyard's art design was basically a series of fields and grassy paths dotted with stone slabs, all arranged into sections with spiky metal fences and littered with gravestones, as graveyards typically tend to be. As such, this is the general layout of the graveyard in PlayStation All-Stars, which is basically just a grassy area paved loosely with stone, with the hill in the middle representing the fact that most of the graveyard in the original game was very hilly. One particular area of note was a small paved corridor area, which was the area with the greatest density of stone structures in the entire level. This was the likely inspiration for the stone structures on the left-hand side of the stage in PlayStation All-Stars. Throughout the graveyard levels, Dan would encounter zombies recently resurrected along with our duelist hero. These were typically the weakest and most useless enemies in the game, dispatched with very few sword slashes and who attack simply by stumbling towards you fairly slowly. Not much of a threat, even in large groups. Zombies also appear in the graveyard stage, popping up in the background and lumbering around uselessly before being zapped or getting stuck on fences. As for some of the background details, the creepy tree in the background is from the original EU cover of the game, and some of these trees appeared on the game's title screen as well. But there are 2 background details that need a little more explanation.
All has changed outside the necropolis. Paths go this way, paths go that way. Nasty, painful death waits round every turn and over every hill. Bon voyage.
You may remember these guys from Dan's video. Throughout Medieval, you could encounter Gargoyles whose role was complex. They were ancient, omniscient observers who referred to Zarek as the Master, and yet still helped Dan as much as they could. Due to how sarcastic they typically were, it's entirely likely that they were just Gallomere's biggest trolls. In the first Medieval, they were creepy faces on walls, but in Resurrection they became, well, whatever this thing is, I have no idea. Sadly, PlayStation All-Stars opted for the Resurrection design, but the Gargoyle's sarcastic demeanour is still intact, and this Gargoyle will make snide remarks about certain characters.
Let's see how the hero of Gallowmere fares against opponents with a pulse. Better think twice about your plans. Quickly! These tunes have already been plenty ready, thank you. All hail her royal stoutness. Everyone check your pockets. Eating raccoon about. No need to be so irate, mate. That bad's been full. While you are executing the tools, Hunter, with another shirt. 3, 2, 1.
In the original Graveyard level, Dan encountered an angel statue in the middle of a series of gates. Hitting the statue spun it around, turning it into a switch. If the angel's gaze fell on a gate, the gate would open, and moving the statue correctly opened different paths. In Resurrection, the same thing applied, only now the angel could shoot lightning. I don't even. The angel appears in the PlayStation All-Stars Graveyard, where it shoots lightning like the Resurrection version, although for some reason this isn't a hazard. Well, now it's music time. The indie game market has been expanding in recent years, with new developers making small, low-budget projects and attracting a growing audience of people who want something different from the latest big-budget blockbuster. Sony have become very aware of these small game projects and have decided to support these artistic little projects by giving them releases on their systems. One of these was The Unfinished Swan. Developed by small studio Giant Sparrow, The Unfinished Swan was a maze-based game centered around paint and a strange world designed by an eccentric king. The central gameplay mechanic involved placing the player in a white void and giving them the ability to chuck black blobs of paint around. These black blobs of paint shaded the world and allowed the player to see exactly where they were going. As the game progressed, more of the world became visible and the paint throwing mechanic got changed around a bit, but this basic black on white aesthetic is what we're most interested in, because this white void materializes in the graveyard, prompting the mashup. When this happens, black blobs of paint are thrown into the world just like in the original game, bringing new areas of the level into existence simply by revealing them in the whiteness. And what are these areas based on? Well, some of these things are based on objects you could reveal in the world of The Unfinished Swan. As you move through the world, you often find yourself revealing wooden structures and a statue garden, with the areas revealing themselves to be essentially the maintenance areas of a grand palace. Some of the things you could uncover included crates and barrels with large areas of scaffolding leading you to new areas. All of these wooden structures are revealed throughout the graveyard. The scaffolding becomes the basis for the new platforms and the gargoyle's plinth becomes crates. Another thing you could reveal through your paint splashing was a grand statue of a mustachioed king sitting in the middle of a small area. This king had a larger role to play in the story of the game, with the statue even talking to you in the final chapter before being splattered with paint. This king statue can be seen in the background of the graveyard following the first appearance of the White Void. When shade began to appear in the Unfinished Swan world, you entered a labyrinth that made up the grounds of the palace. As well as making a move through the labyrinth, you also got some pretty breathtaking views of it from above at various points, including a final view of it in the game's final chapter where you became a giant. Don't ask. The labyrinth can also be seen in the background of the graveyard if you look closely, with the main palace building sitting in the middle looking exactly as it did in its original form. Throughout the world of the Unfinished Swan you could find balloons, and shooting them with paint blobs allowed you to set them free. They were basically the game's main collectibles. Their relevance isn't clear, but it's possible that it has a lot to do with the fact that the main character was a small boy. Balloons can be seen occasionally in the graveyard as another little background detail when the platforms begin to appear. You can't interact with them this time, however. Finally, the game is called The Unfinished Swan because the plot centers around the protagonist's mother, a painter who never finishes her projects. Her picture of an unfinished swan came to life and escaped into the magical world the game is set in. As you progress through the game, you are basically in pursuit of the bird who would pop up occasionally to taunt you. His footprints also acted as a means to guide you through the initial white void, because the bright yellow often acted as a marker for you. The mashup in the graveyard kicks off when the unfinished swan of the title flies into the medieval world and honks, prompting everything to turn white. The swan makes a few more fleeting appearances in the stage after this. Its footprints also appear at the bottom of the stage once the mashup kicks in. This time they're just decoration rather than a marker, since it's a little hard to get lost on a 2D plane like that. And that's basically it. So finally, the music of the Unfinished Swan.
With each step I took, I got larger. I just kept growing and growing like a teenager. With a gentle push, my mind crumbled and sank.
and that is the graveyard. Thank you for watching, and I will have a very special double video next time, so stay tuned for that.